Hi, how you doing? And welcome to Rude Awakening Episode 3. Tommy and I are just enjoying a little beer as we're doing this. In the words of my most appreciated mathematician, John Nash, I have respect for beer. So we got to keep that close by. In this episode, we're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about the magnetosphere and how that plays in the world today, as well as the catastrophe that we're talking about. But then I wanted to dwell into some of the ancient myths and legends that I had said earlier. It seems that all of them are pointing in the same direction. They're all basically saying the same thing. And the problem is some people get attached to one of them and they spend the rest of their lives only believing in that one. But the fact of the matter is, this is the tale that's been told for tens of thousands of years all over the world. So we're going to look at that as well tonight. So again, we're going to be talking an awful lot about the magnetosphere, how it fits into the puzzle, and why you should be concerned about it now. Because we're seeing signs throughout the magnetosphere that shows that it's acting erratically. For the first time in recorded history. And the lines that it is following is not only spanning over hundreds of years, but it's speeding up logarithmically. And that's both in the intensity of the magnetosphere and the position of the North Pole. Just to give you a quick background, the magnetosphere is measured in what's called nanoteslas. Really cool. Again, one of my favorite scientists. The Earth's range for the magnetosphere is somewhere between 25 nanoteslas and 65 nanoteslas. Currently, it's at 29 and it's dropping fast. Just to give you an idea of how fragile the magnetosphere is, remember Earth's range is 25 to 65 nanotesla. A strong refrigerator magnet is 100,000 nanoteslas. Okay, so the magnetosphere is weaker than that. So it doesn't have to drop a whole lot to be showing the type of symptoms of what we're talking about here. Again, the magnetosphere is weakening at a logarithmic rate. But the movement of magnetic north, you've probably heard a lot about this, is moving logarithmically as well. And it's speeding up. Right now, it's moving at about 35 miles a year towards Siberia. And I'll show you some charts later on that. But as it weakens, what we can expect scientifically is that it's going to cause a number of problems with our satellites, communications, and the power grid. And so we'll get into that a little more in just a moment. Our magnetosphere is protecting us from the sun, and it stands about 93 million miles from the sun, the Earth, and that 93 million miles is what's called an astronomical unit. That's how we measure the rest of the galaxy, is in astronomical units based upon that measurement. So if you think of it in terms of distance, think about a light year. Okay? We know that the nearest star to the Earth is about 4.3 light years away. In other words, if you can speed off as fast as the speed of light, it would take you 4.3 years to get there from here. Well, using that same speed, if you left the sun and was traveling to the Earth, it would take you 8.3 seconds. That's how close the sun is to the Earth. And the whole purpose of the magnetosphere is to protect us. It's like a big umbrella. It protects the Earth from solar winds, cosmic rays, cosmic particles, things that we would associate with cancer and other skin diseases, cosmic rays, gamma rays, UV rays as well, are known to have effects on our DNA. So it's very important that it be there. We need to have that protection from the sun's radiation. It's kind of like a chivalrous guy who's holding an umbrella for someone to get in their car. It's great. It's there for our protection. It's there to make us more comfortable and to keep life going. But that only works if if it's strong enough. If it's not strong enough for the kind of pressures and rays that we're going to run into, well, then that's a big problem. It's just not strong enough. But the magnetosphere is very important because it's what allows us to get on a plane, take our family on an extended vacation around the Earth, or whatever destination that we had in mind. And then it allows us, the pilot, to find home again and land the plane. More importantly, perhaps, is the fact that the military considers it vital. It is the only means by which the military can send a plane on a mission, be able to go from perhaps the United States over to the Middle East, as an example, or wherever it is it needs to be, release its payload and have that payload hit the target rather than, say, a hospital or a school. Without the magnetosphere working correctly, they would not be able to do that. It's what allows us to use a compass to go backpacking or find our way around the countryside. It's what's needed in order for our cell phones to work. It's what's needed in order for the GPS in our cars to work. And especially, it's needed for satellites. The satellites operate within that magnetosphere, and unless they're working correctly, you're not going to have GPS, you're not going to have the communications necessary for the logistics of emergency services, food, fuel, all the things that we come to rely on every single day. It's also important because that's the means by which wildlife is able to find its way around. As an example, birds in flight, they use that in order to be able to fly north and to fly south during the seasons. Additionally, honeybees. It's one of the ways that they are able to find the pollen that they need in order to go back to the hive and make that nectar. It's necessary for whales in order to migrate the oceans. So the magnetosphere is our friend. It protects us from the sun. It helps us to move around and have all those electronic conveniences that we have come to enjoy in life, and it works really, really well until it doesn't. Okay, good. I'm going to apologize here for a second. I advertised for a lighting director. I ended up getting a lighting dictator. So, okay. But the fact of the matter is, the Earth and its magnetosphere is sick. Again, we're talking about some changes in how it's weakening 10 times faster now. As well, the North Pole is moving, and we've already talked about what that's going to lead to. So normally, the magnetosphere, as we said, is 25 to 65 nanoteslas. Right now, as of 2000, and I'm looking at the chart right now, as of 2002, that is down to 29 nanoteslas. And again, that comparison, strong refrigerator magnet is 100,000 nanoteslas. Okay, it's very weak. So when we see these major shifts in it, we can expect that there's going to be difficulties with it. As well, the North Pole itself has been moving at a pretty quick pace. And really, that's something you probably heard about. This is the reason why airports um, are having to repaint the runways all the time. The big numbers that you see at the end of each or at the beginning of each runway, those numbers are the degrees of north that the airline needs to know about. In other words, when they're flying, even if they're in autopilot, they know that if they need to be on runway 22, they can set their compass to 22 degrees and know that they can get right there. That works great even in the fog, even in storms, so that they're able to land on the runway as opposed to your neighbor's house. But magnetic north has been moving dramatically. The chart that we have here begins in 1590, goes all the way out to this year, 2020, and you'll notice that the how fast and how dramatic magnetic north is moving is on a logarithmic scale. In other words, the first 40 years, you'll notice on this that it travels. I don't really have a comparison in miles here of what it's doing. But you'll notice that the first 40 years, it goes one direction, then it changes dramatically and it goes the other direction. And that direction stays for another 100 years. Okay, then it changes dramatically and it stays in that direction, but it goes much further over the next 80 years. And then you'll notice right there at the very bottom of the chart, 1859. Keep that date in mind, 1859. Here it makes a tremendous change, and then it just starts speeding up towards Siberia. And again, as I had mentioned before, it's running now at about 35 miles a year. That's really fast for magnetic north to be moving. And it's following that same direction, and it's been following that same direction now for 140 years. So we know it's going in a steady direction here. And quite honestly, with the history of this model of the cataclysm we're talking about, polar reversals and the change, it's headed exactly to where they expected it was going to go. And this is recorded way back in the 1940s that they knew that this was going to happen. Okay, so let's go back to that date, 1859. You may have heard something called the Carrington event. The Carrington event happened in 1859. Basically, what it was, September 1st, 1859. Basically, what it was, it's named after Professor Carrington, who was an astronomer. And he was looking through his telescope at the sun, and he noticed that a gigantic flare came off of the sun. Well, the interesting thing is that 17 hours later, the Carrington event happened. And what that was the energy from that solar flare hit the Earth. And when it did, it went through the wires, the telegraph wires that were on Earth at that time, and literally caught the poles on fire. It shocked the telegraphers. It caught paper in their offices on fire. It was a tremendous surge of energy. Now, back in 1859, telegraphs was pretty much all the technology they had. There wasn't much in the way of electronics. Today, we have satellites, cell phones, computers, the power grid, the things that run everything that we have grown accustomed to. And it is estimated that if that kind of solar event happened again, it would completely wipe it out. It would literally, in a second, send mankind back to the Stone Age. And it would take years and years for them to rebuild that infrastructure. As an example, the transformers on the power poles, they would just blow up from that surge of energy. But the problem is that I don't know of a country in the world that keeps spare transformers. So when that power grid goes down, it's going to take years just to put it together, but they got to build the transformers to begin with. And my understanding is that, each transformer takes quite a bit of time to build. This is the reason why they don't have spares laying around. The other problem is that, again, when we're talking about the effect that it's going to have on electronics, anything from satellites to your cell phones to computers, the electronics just isn't as beefy as it was back in 1859. It's made with much lighter materials because we're able to build these things much smaller, but it can't handle that kind of a power load. So whether you're plugged into an outlet or not isn't going to make any difference. This is the kind of electrical power that's going to just move right through the atmosphere. And when that happens, it's going to fry everything. Now, if you had a early 70s pickup truck, you may be able to get by with a couple spare parts to put that back together, get it back on the road. But with today's computer-driven cars, forget it. It's just going to fry it. You're not going to be able to use it. And that's something that you're going to want to keep in mind as we get closer and closer to this event. You're going to want to prepare yourself for that eventuality. And whether we're talking about the sun novaing or not, even just another solar flare the size of the Carrington event, which is minuscule compared to what we're talking about with the sun nova. The possibility of that happening is pretty good. In fact, I believe it was in 2004 that we had a Carrington event size solar flare. And I believe it was an X-class flare. And it just narrowly missed the Earth. Had it hit the Earth, we already would be living in those conditions that I'm talking about. But here's the interesting thing. Again, Carrington event was in 1859. On the chart, where was the major change? When did this start building up and start logarithmically speeding up? It was in 1859. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. We know that the rotation of the Earth is directly related to the magnetosphere and its interaction with the magnetic field of the sun. So for that Carrington event to happen, which we haven't seen again since 1859, to cause that kind of a change seems more than just a coincidence. Excuse me. We can edit that out, right?
No, I'm keeping it.
Oh, wait. John Nash moment. Beer. Repeat after me. I have respect for beer. And pizza.
Boom.
Okay. So, we've talked about the magnetosphere. We talked about the Carrington event. We've looked at the chart already about the weakening of the magnetosphere. So that brings us to, and we can cut this part out. Okay. So you're going to want to edit this out. Okay, yeah. But that brings us to the fact that the Earth is sick. The magnetosphere is sick. The scientific evidence of just these two things is showing that we're headed towards problems. And when we're talking about that catastrophe, we're talking about an event that is massive, bigger than you can even imagine. But it's an event that in the past, civilizations not only witnessed, they saw it both in the effect that it had on the Earth, it had on the animals, it had on people, but they also saw the events take place in the heavens. And it was based upon these things that the petroglyphs were made. It was based upon these things that they knew they had to go underground. It was based upon these things in which they wrote their mythologies. Why? In order to remember them. What did we say that the purpose of this documentary and theory is to answer three basic questions. Where did we come from? We came from the last previous civilization. Where are we going? We're going to give birth to the next civilization. And what is the meaning of life? It's the survival of life itself.
So it's intermission time. You get yourself a hot dog or something to drink. And yeah, you punk ass little bitch.
I talked in earlier episodes about ancient civilizations, all parts of the world pointing to the same thing. They're talking about the same thing. They're just not talking to each other. So that's one of the things that I hope to do with this video series is get people to set aside their differences, talk to each other, because if the theory is correct, if this is what we're looking towards, we're all going to have to chip in together and get this done. So I'm going to take you back to what I think is the cornerstone of mythology. I'm going to take you all the way back to the 4th century, to a Greek philosopher by the name of Plato. Not Play-Doh, Plato. Plato. Lived back in the 4th century BCE. And in his book, under the title of Timaeus, a lot of people point to it and say, oh, this is where he talks about the mythology of Atlantis, and they go off on their tangents and everyone's trying to find Atlantis all over the world, or some people think that they've already found it. But I'm going to look at it from a different point of view. Okay, I'm going to use the same characters in this conversation, but we're going to look at it from the perspective of the theory that we're talking about. Okay, and the reason we're doing that, in my experience, in the experience of others that I've talked to, once they found this theory, it was like everything that they had learned before just fell into place. It was like the final puzzle piece that they needed to understand all of the things that they had learned before. And I really think that this is by design of those who had survived the last cataclysm, in order for the perpetuation of the stories that give us the clues of what they knew back then that would help us to survive the cataclysm that we're talking about now. So again, we're going to go back to the 4th century Plato, the book of Timaeus, and in it, he tells us what happened to our history of ancient civilization. Why is it that we know almost nothing about those ancient civilizations? And the characters in this, this is a conversation between the great Greek statesman and lawgiver Solon, who was a descendant of Plato, and the Egyptian priest Sankis of Sais. And so the conversation was not in Plato's day, it was in the day of Solon. And Solon lived back in the 5th and 6th century BCE. So this conversation is about Atlantis, but it's a record, really, of what Sankis had said was what happened 9,000 years before the conversation that was taking place. So let's get into that. Okay, and so I'm going to be reading this almost word for word from Plato's writing. He said, or Sankis said to Solon, he says, the truth is that there are two cycles of the world. and in one of them it is governed by an immediate providence and receives life and immortality, and in the other is let go again and has a reverse action during infinite ages. This new action is spontaneous, and is due to exquisite perfection of balance, to the vast size of the universe, and to the smallness of the pivot upon which it turns. Then it says, all changes in heaven affect the animal world, and this being the greatest of them, is most destructive to men and animals. At the beginning of the cycle, before our own very few of them had survived, and on these a mighty change passed. Then Sankis goes on to say, now the Nile is our savior from fire. As there is little rain in Egypt, we are not harmed by water, whereas in other countries, when a deluge comes, the inhabitants are swept away by the rivers into the sea. The memorials which your own and other nations have once had of the famous actions of mankind perish in the waters at certain periods, and the rude survivors in the mountains begin again, knowing nothing of the world before the flood. But in Egypt, the traditions of our own and other lands are by us registered forever in our temples. The genealogies which you have recited to us out of your own annals, Solon, are a mere children's story. For in the first place you remember only one deluge, and there were many of them, and you know nothing of that fairest and noblest race of which you are a seed or remnant. The memory of them was lost because there was no written voice among you. So Sankis goes on to tell us a couple things here. One, he's talking about that cataclysm. He's talking about fires and floods that decimate civilizations, the civilizations before them. He's talking about a deluge that wipes out civilizations, but he keys in on an important point. There were many. Now this goes back to, as you look at civilizations around the world today, as an example, the Hopi Indians. The Hopi Indians claim that according to their oral tradition, there were 4 worlds. The Egyptians say that there were 7. The Aborigines say there were 11. Why? Because their oral traditions were carried on through each of those civilizations. So again, it lends weight to Sankis' claim here that this catastrophe happens on a cyclical basis over a set period of time, and it has happened repeatedly. Okay, but the problem is that those who survived did not carry on that history. Those civilizations were wiped out, and so that is why we know very little about them. Okay, but let's continue on with that conversation. Plato writes, and then one of the priests, that is the Egyptian priest, a very old man, said, Solon, you Greeks are ever children. There isn't an old man among you. On hearing this, Solon said, What? What do you mean? The priest says, you are young in soul, every one of you. Your souls are devoid of beliefs about antiquity, handed down by ancient tradition. Your souls lack any learning made hoary by time. The reason for this, and this is a direct quote, the reason for that is this: there have been, and there will continue to be, numerous disasters that have destroyed human life in many kinds of ways. The most serious of these involve fire and water. Among your people, the tale is told. First of all, I'm going to stop here. We can edit this out. But at this point, Sankis is going to tell Solon something that we really need to keep in mind, especially when we're talking about the myths and legends of old, giving us valuable information in this day and age. Okay? He's trying to tell Solon that they have meaning, that there is truth behind them. So here we read, among your people the tale is told that Phaeton, child of the sun, once harnessed his father's chariot, but was unable to drive it along its father's course. He ended up burning everything on the earth's surface and was destroyed himself when a lightning bolt struck him. Then he goes on to say, and again, this is a direct quote, this tale is told as myth, but the truth behind it is that there is a deviation in the heavenly bodies that travel around the earth, which causes huge fires that destroy what is on the earth across vast stretches of time. So Sonkis is telling us there's truth in those myths. Maybe not everything is truth, but there is truth behind every story. And we've learned that repeatedly throughout our lives, haven't we? That what we originally thought was a child's story had some value for us. Let me just give you an example of why they did that. You see, the important thing was to train society about certain rules or certain ways of doing things. We do that today. As an example, if let me use Tommy as a guinea pig here. Tommy, what's the ABCs? Tell me the ABCs.
ABCs.
Give me the ABCs.
What do you mean? Like,
Yeah, recite the ABCs.
A, B, C, D, like it's a song?
Like it's a song.
Yep.
Exactly. They put it into song form so that you would remember it easily.
Yep, it's easy to remember that.
Yeah, so too with these myths. They put them into story form so that the value of them would continue on. Okay, but Sonkis goes on to say this. When this happens, all those people who live in the mountains or in places that are high and dry are much more likely to perish than the ones who live next to rivers or by seas. Our Nile, always our Savior, is released, and at such times too saves us from this disaster. On the other hand, whenever the gods send floods of water upon the earth to purge it, the herdsmen and the shepherds in the mountains preserve their lives, while those who live in cities in your region are swept by the rivers into the sea. Okay, so Sonkis here is telling us two things. There are two things we have to look out for. One of them is huge fires that engulf the earth. The other one is floods. Now remember, in the earlier episode when we talked about this catastrophe, we said that the earth would stop rotating or would shift rotation, would slow down, and on whatever side is facing the sun when that occurs is gonna bake. Everything's gonna catch on fire. Huge fires that engulf the earth. However, on the other side, everything's going to freeze. And while all that's happening, what's going to happen with the momentum that the oceans have built up? Remember, the earth spins at 1,000 miles per hour, and when it slows down, or if it should come to a stop, there's still theories on both ends of that right now. Those oceans are going to continue on. It's going to flood everything. So really, what he's saying is two things. One, it's the perspective of where you are on earth that determines whether you're going to have fire or floods. And two, it doesn't always happen. You know, the same part of the earth that's facing the sun isn't always the same place. Okay, so you never know who's going to have what. But he gives us valuable information here. When he's talking about fire, he says those in the mountains are going to have a problem. Okay, when he's talking about floods, those that are near the rivers, the lakes, the oceans, they're the ones that are not going to survive. Okay, but in the next paragraph, he brings up a very interesting point. He says, but here, Egypt, in this place, water does not flow from on high onto our fields, either at such a time or any other. On the contrary, its nature is always to rise up from below. This then explains the fact that the antiquities preserved here in Egypt are said to be the most ancient. Well, if you've been following Egyptology for as long as I have, and as long as modern civilization has, that is for hundreds of years, you understand what he just said there. There is something about Egypt that allowed them to maintain those histories. There's something geologically about Egypt. Well, what could that be? Why is that location conducive to survival? Well, for that, we need to go back to tectonic plates that we talked about in the last episode. And you'll notice here on this slide that Egypt, which is in the very northwest part of the African plate, the tectonic plate, is right up against the Arabian plate. And the Arabian plate, which is very small, landlocked, is really quite unique, because look at all those other plates. Do you see any of those plates that are landlocked, that aren't surrounded by oceans the way all the other tectonic plates are? Okay, then you have the Indian plate as well, very small, half of it is landlocked. Okay, the other thing that's interesting about the borders of those tectonic plates is that's where the Himalayan mountains are. Now, Himalayan mountains are unique. They are the only mountains that are continually growing, even to this day. I can't remember how tall they get each year, but they are continually growing. That's because of the plate tectonics in which they're situated. The other thing about the Himalayas is, if you take a look at mountain ranges throughout the world, you notice that the majority of them run north to south. That's reasonable considering the rotation of the Earth, the direction that it's going, and the placement of the edges of those tectonic plates. However, the Himalayas, because of the tectonic plates that they're on, they are running east to west. That's very unusual. And so perhaps that gives this location of Egypt, and then we're going to have to say the same about Turkey, Iran, Iraq, India, Pakistan, all of these areas which we consider to be the hub of civilization, where civilization began. Perhaps this is the reason why they survived. Okay, so let's continue on though with that conversation according to Plato. Okay, Sankis says this. It says, the truth is that in all places where neither inordinate cold nor heat prevent it, the human race will continue to exist, sometimes in greater, sometimes in lesser numbers. Now, of all the events reported to us, no matter where they've occurred, if there are any that are noble or great or distinguished, they've all been inscribed here in our temples and preserved from antiquity on. In your case, no sooner have you achieved literacy and all the other resources that cities required, then there again, after the usual number of years, comes the heavenly flood. It sweeps upon you like a plague and leaves only your illiterate and uncultured people behind. You become infants all over again, as it were, completely unfamiliar with anything there was in ancient times. It's really an amazing read, and I highly recommend that everyone get a chance to read that, which is, I found in the complete works of Plato in the book Timaeus. So we went into this asking ourselves, what happened to our history? Why is it we know very little about ancient civilization? Well, Plato explains it very well here. There have been multiple cyclical disasters caused by fire and flood. Plato, or Sankis, through Plato, talks about polar reversal, the reversal of things. But he also says that a tremendous change comes upon those who survive. And that gives us reason to believe that evolution here on Earth can sometimes be spontaneous. He also goes in and he tells us that during these disasters, there is a nearly complete loss of life, loss of civilization, and loss of history. He tells us that the unique position of Egypt, where we find the pyramids of Giza and the Sphinx, is conducive to survival. And so as we look to that now, it gives us reason to say, how can we use that information for our own survival? But here's what the reason I wanted to put Plato up front, because it teaches us what I think is the most powerful lesson. There is truth behind many of the ancient myths and legend. And that being the case, we need to set aside our differences. We need to learn those myths and legends, talk together, and find out how those civilizations survived this catastrophe. So, again, we're talking about ancient civilizations, but that talk about the same thing. They're all pointing us in the same direction. This time, I'm going to be talking about a prophecy way back in the 15th and 16th century. And we'll get into all different kinds of ones. I mean, I've done research on 12 different civilizations, but there's a number of prophets as well throughout history that are pretty famous. One of them is Mother Shipton. Mother Shipton lived in from 1488 to 1561, and she is pretty well renowned in modern age as being a prophetess who had was able to prophesy a number of major events that happened throughout the world. And here I'm going to give a little bit of a caveat here, because I know that people have spent their entire lives studying and interpreting a number of different prophets. Nostradamus for one, Edgar Cayce, Mother Shipton, but they've also done the same thing with the works of Gilgamesh and the Bible, for instance, and Vedic mythologies and prophecies as well. They spent their entire lives reading those and interpreting those. But here's an important point that I'm going to bring up over and over and over again. And that is, until I found this particular theory, everything that I had learned through my 58 years, when I found that theory, just fell into place. And that's when I realized that everything was pointing to the same thing. That is true as well with Mother Shipton. So if you've gone through this before, kind of take everything that you've learned before and put it aside. And let's look at it through this particular set of lenses and see how it fits with what we're talking about here. Okay? So I am going to read directly from Mother Shipton through this entire part, and just pause a couple times in order to explain a couple things. Okay? So here goes. Mother Shipton prophesied this. For those who live the century through, in fear and trembling this shall do. Flee to the mountains and the dens, to bog and forest and wild fens. For storms will rage and oceans roar when Gabriel stands on sea and shore, and as he blows his wondrous horn, old worlds die and new be born. A fiery dragon will cross the sky 6 times before this earth shall die. Mankind will tremble and frightened be for the 6th heralds in this prophecy. For 7 days and 7 nights, man will watch this awesome sight. The tides will rise beyond their ken to bite away the shores, and then the mountains will begin to roar, and earthquakes split the plain to shore. The flooding waters rushing in will flood the land with such a din that mankind cowers in muddy fen and snarls about his fellow men. He bares his teeth and fights and kills and secretes food in secret hills, and ugly in his fear he lies to kill marauders, thieves, and spies. Man flees in terror from the floods, and kills and rapes and lies in blood, and spilling blood by mankind's hands will stain and bitter many lands. And when the dragon's tail is gone, man forgets and smiles and carries on to apply himself. Too late, for mankind has deserved his fate. His masked smile, his false grandeur, will serve the gods their anger stir, and they will send the dragon back. To light the sky his tail will crack upon the earth and rend the earth, and man shall flee, king, lord, and serf. But slowly they are rooted out to seek diminishing water spout. Men will die of thirst before the ocean rise to mount the shore, and land will crack and rend anew. You think it's strange? It will come true. And in some far-off distant land, some men, oh, such a tiny band, will have to leave their solid mount and span the earth, those few to count, who survive this and then begin the human race again. But not on land already there, but on ocean beds, stark, dry, and bare. Not every soul on earth will die, and as the dragon's tails go sweeping by, not every land on earth will sink, but these will wallow in stench and stink of rotting bodies of beast and man, of vegetation crisped on land. And those that live will ever fear the dragon's tail for many years. But time erases memory. You think it's strange, but it will be. And before the race is built anew, a silver serpent comes to view, and spew out men of like unknown, to mingle with the earth now grown, cold from its heat, and these men can enlighten the mind of future man. To intermingle and show them how to live and love and thus endow the children with the second sight and natural things, so that they might grow graceful, humble, and when they do, the golden age will start anew. The dragon's tail is but a sign for mankind's fall and man's decline, and before this prophecy is done, I shall be burned at the stake at one, my body singed, my soul set free. You think it utter blasphemy? You're wrong. These things have come to be. This prophecy will come to be. So, in those few stanzas, Mother Shipton touches on a number of the common themes that we see in all the ancient myths from all the ancient civilizations that point us to what we're talking about here. As an example, she talks of oceans overcoming mountaintops, of old worlds dying and a new one beginning. And she talks about signs in the visible sky that last 7 days. And that reminds us, of horns that are heard that goes directly back to a number of mythologies. As an example, in the book of Revelation, or in the ancient Chinese mythologies that talk about dragons that continually circle the earth for 7 days that sound like trumpets that are being blown. She talks about lands dropping, about oceans rising, about how mankind themselves will face a period of time when they go absolutely crazy, marauding and killing and raping, and we will actually touch on the scientific basis of why we believe that that is going to happen. But she also touches on the fact that very few survive. But as well, she talks about a golden age after the earth has been wiped clean. And here's an interesting theme that you're going to find so common in these mythologies. I can't believe I didn't see it long before. She talks about benevolent beings teaching the survivors for the new civilization.
So these beings, aliens, that's what I believe. Maybe most people can't see them because they're coming around. Our five senses are what, 1/1,000,000th of a reality. So the human eye can only see so much. So I'm sure there's plenty of aliens creeping around, and some people can see them. It's kind of like, can you see electrons orbiting over certain rocks? Not with the pathetic human eye, no. You'd have to have a UV light, and that's what makes those rocks glow, is the ultraviolet. So I've had many alien experiences, all kinds of different ones, and they don't put stuff in your butt that's ridiculous. That's just what they do. They're messing with your, they're genetically engineering you. They're taking parts of your DNA, preparing and watching over us, waiting for that supernova to happen again. So the ones who survive, they can teach us all over again how to become advanced and screw it all up again, right? Just to watch us be wiped out, except for the few survivors. But my abductions, my experiences, started when I was really young, with sleep paralysis, noticing weird stuff in the sky. I was always looking at the sky or the ground, picking up rocks or looking at the stars. But one of my stories was back in Iowa, north of Cedar Rapids. I was with a buddy. We were driving out. We were always like looking at stars, and like that's what we do. But we were driving around, and we were driving around, way out in the country. Just looking for some cool, see if we could see UFOs or something. But this time, something really happened. The truck I was driving, the headlights started getting real dim, and it was about ready to die. And we pull over into the spot next to a cornfield. No way, right? And it just died. Our phones were dead. We had no power, nothing at all. And we're just like, okay, we're stranded out here. It was the middle of winter time, so it was really cold. And, everything started changing like a green color right where we were at. We're standing outside the truck. And it started getting warm. Like, we had to take our coats off and everything. And we're like, what's going on? And then it started raining stars. That's what it looked like. It was like raining stars coming down. And it was just like a bright light above that. It lasted, quite a while, probably 20 minutes. And then it just disappeared. It was dark again and super cold, and freezing our butts off. So we run back to the truck. Starts right up. All of our power is restored. But once we look at the time, we had lost 4 hours. So explain that one. So I had many in between that, but there was another specific one in Crown King, Arizona. My wife and I, Ashley, we went camping up Crown King, and the same kind of thing happened. We set up camp and went to the Jeep to start it up, and no power, no nothing. None of our flashlights worked. Our phones didn't work. Nothing. We're stuck out there for 3 days, like way up in there. And but that first night, after that happened, we like screw it. We can't do much now. We're just go in the tent and get some sleep. While we're laying there, we both get sleep paralysis, but we haven't fallen asleep. We're just laying there, but we had total paralysis. Couldn't move, couldn't talk. And this thing comes up to the tent, and it's like going back and forth, looking at us, almond-shaped eyes. And that was the last thing I remember when we woke up, and we're both talking about it. I was like, "What? That was crazy!" And like, I go outside, get a little fire going so we can make some food. And there's a big white owl, probably about 20 feet away from me, staring at me, kind of doing the same look. And I'm like, "Whoa!" And we tried to get some pictures of it, and flew off. But finally, it was like 3 days later, another jeeper come around, jumped us, got our jeep going, and we headed back home. So we get home that night. This is crazy. So I'm laying in bed, and I get sleep paralysis again. I haven't fallen asleep. I get that paralysis. And this guy, all in black, you can call them shadow people or men in black, he walks into my room, and he's all, rah, ha, rah. And he walks across the room, and I had sleep paralysis. And again, I fall asleep, wake up the next day remembering it. I even end up painting a picture of him. Well, this stuff got me really going, so I had to do some research on this. I started researching shadow people and these men in black. Yeah, and I come to find out these people, they come in to erase your memory from your alien abductions. So that was pretty wild. That was just a couple of my experiences, and I got deep into it, even like all the way to like monatomic gold and how they use it for telepathy and communicating. So I started taking monatomic gold to see if I can communicate with them, but I haven't had a whole lot of experiences like that for a while. But kind of miss it, even though it's freaky. But I do see a lot of stuff in the sky. But anyway, I believe in aliens.
What I'm trying to encourage is the back and forth banter. These episodes get put out, but I get a lot of people that are seeing them coming in the store. And man, we sit there and we talk for hours about this. Why? Because they're expressing what they've learned in the past and how this fits in, and they got a lot of questions, so I'm glad to answer them from a scientific standpoint. But no, I agree. A lot of what people have been taught is a controlling mechanism.
It has been.
What the people don't understand, and this is why you have to understand that all the mythologies are pointing in the same way, is what we've all been taught is just the beginning. It's just that, like you said a second ago, it's just that little seed that needed to be put in there.
Yeah.
Okay, that was what needed to survive the past 10,500 years of civilization. People do things for ulterior motives. Okay, and there's a lot of people out there that all they care about money, and when they get enough, to where they can never spend it the rest of their life, what do they go for? Power.
Yeah.
They want control. And I think that's what has happened over the millennia, is that people have been looking for a way to control people. And as times go by, as an example, the things that they were teaching, 500-600 years ago was enough to keep people in control. But now we're in modern times, the scientific age, they have to flip script
Yeah.
in order to keep that control. And I think that that's what's going on. What you have to do is you have to go back to the very basics.
Yep.
It says,
Exactly.
let me give you an example of that. The Ten Commandments. I'd have been fine with the Ten Commandments. Okay, got it. Ten Commandments. That's pretty easy to understand. But no, they had to write thousands of laws around those Ten Commandments.
There's too many.
The Constitution. Pretty easy. I mean, it's a little pamphlet,
really
right?
Easy.
But no, they had to put tens of thousands of laws surrounding that. Let's keep
I
it
hate
simple, stupid.
No, yeah, simple, the better. Because otherwise, all you do, the more you get, the more everything divides. The more divided, the easier you fall.
Mm-hmm. I like that we're continuing filming because this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the interchange of ideas. I don't want this to be some cult phenomena.
Yeah.
Where I'm the leader and and
He's not the leader.
Yeah, people are throwing money at me. I mean, fuck that shit. I've been rejecting that kind of shit my entire life. So what I want is I want people to get together, because I firmly believe that no matter what society or what type of learning that you come from, everything's pointing to the same thing. And as serious as that same thing is, we got a lot of fucking work to do.
We got a lot of work to do. This thing's about to fucking die.
Oh, is it?
The battery's gonna...
Yeah.
Yeah, well, anyway. Son of a bitch motherfucker. Drink a beer.
I have respect for beer.
Respect for beer.
If we're gonna do this, we gotta train everyone that before they sit down to watch an episode, they need to grab a beer, smoke a joint or something.
Yeah, smoke a joint. Probably smoke a joint, drink some beer.
There you
That'd probably
go.
be the best. Oh yeah,
I don't do drugs, but
I don't. Yeah,
but
we
I
don't.
play a character that does on TV.